Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today's video looking at the running back position for Week 10. Guys, you should be starting. Guys, you should be sitting. I will say, I'm ranking the top 30 at the position here, and this was very, very difficult for me. There's a lot of depth, players that are getting good matchups, or teams that are running with two options potentially that have good matchups. Who's going to be able to perform this week? Who's going to fall victim of just not being able to put together a touchdown, I guess I would say. But again, we're looking at the top 30 running backs for Week 10. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to let me know. Like, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. And as well, our partners over at Betfred, no boost this week. I'm going no boost. I need one play, no parlay. I'm more of a single wager type of guy. I don't usually parlay a lot of things. So one play for Falcons, Panthers. The only thing to make this game watchable is going to be a prop. It looks to be, from the weather reporter here in the office, Avery Chenier, told me that there's going to be wind and rain in Carolina, up to 20-kilometer winds at game time. That people pay attention more to rain than they do wind when it comes to how it impacts the game script. Wind is the thing that impacts passing. And if there's winds 20-plus miles an hour, I will definitely look towards the run game. And we already know the Falcons love to run the football. I'm going to go Tyler Algier, over 31.5 rushing yards. Algier did split time with Cordell Patterson last week. Patterson, I was worried about for Algier as to whether or not he'd have really much of any involvement in the ground game, but was very good last week. He had 10 rushing attempts for 99 yards, broke a big play against a terrible Chargers defense, and the Carolina Panthers are actually 30th in fantasy points allowed to running backs on the season. I think Algier can clear this number of 31.5 in a game where I would expect the Falcons to reach close to 30 rushing attempts in this game. So give me that for Algier, and I think this team leans on the ground quite a bit. All right, let's get to the ground, or the entire slate here at the running back position, starting with my top 6. At number 1, Saquon Barkley. The Houston Texans, 32nd in the NFL in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Very easy one there. McCaffrey, another excellent matchup. The Chargers, 31st in fantasy points allowed to running backs. They lost their best run stopper in Austin Johnson for the rest of the season. This team is decimated by injuries. No problem for McCaffrey. Henry in a tough matchup against the Broncos, who are 14th in fantasy points allowed, but 25th in rushing DVOA. That has been their Achilles heel this season, has been the ground game. Very good against the pass, not as good against the run. Travis Etienne continues to be a top 5 back for me each and every week, and he continues to deliver, so I'm not going to stop doing it. The Kansas City Chiefs, 23rd in fantasy points allowed, and the important thing I always tell you guys, always, is the Kansas City Chiefs against opposing running backs who are pass catchers. 7.9 receptions per game to running backs, Kansas City Chiefs allowed. Too high, zone, allows those running backs to make plays in that short yardage areas and make plays after the catch, and Travis Etienne is absolutely fucking elite at doing that. Etienne has looked so good. Love that he's got that number 1 role now. Eckler at 5 in a very tough matchup. The San Francisco 49ers, first in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Doesn't matter for Eckler, though, because this Chargers offense is again going to be without Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Yes, I'm saying that on Wednesday. Keenan Allen is not going to play. I'm sure of it. So that means Eckler is going to see another 10 targets probably, quite frankly, as a pass catcher. That will elevate his floor, even though the Chargers can't run the ball worth a damn. At 6, Tony Pollard. I think Zeke will be out again this week, and the Packers are a terrible run defense. 31st on DVOA, 22nd in fantasy points allowed. Pollard, if he's again by himself, will again be a top 6 running back on the week. The next guy is rounding out the top 12. Alvin Kamara in at 7. The Steelers are actually pretty good against the run, 8th in run defense grade, but 20th in fantasy points allowed. This is a matchup for the Saints where I expect them to be leading this game, and as a result, Kamara will be used aplenty. The only concern is Andy Dalton stinks out loud, and can the Saints finally give Jameis Winston back the ball, because he makes football more fun? And if they do, I'm worried about Kamara's receiving work. So in that scenario, I might bump him down a few spots closer in the week, but right now, this is where I've got him. At 8, Josh Jacobs. We know the Raiders are riding that ground game, but this is a tough matchup. The Colts are 6th in run defense grade, 5th in DVOA, been very good against the run this season. So this is a tough matchup for Jacobs, but regardless, I think that he's going to be heavily utilized, kind of regardless of matchup. And this one is intimidating, but this Colts team's not going to score enough points where this game script will get out of control, and Jacobs won't be running the ball. At 9, Cordell Patterson. We talked about the Panthers, 30th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. An excellent matchup here for Patterson, and his usage is back to what it was before injury. No worries there. At 10, Nick Chubb going against the Dolphins. I think this is a tough matchup. The Dolphins 12th in fantasy points, but they are one of the best run defending teams in the league. I think that kind of makes Chubb a guy who is either front-end RB2, back-end RB1. I think that's an appropriate way to grade him this week in a tough matchup. But regardless, in terms of opportunity and skill set, he's still a guy that we're going to be playing. At 11, Dameon Pierce. Pierce going against the Giants, who are 24th in DVOA, 26th in fantasy points, or actually 26th in run defense grade. They've been okay fantasy points allowed. That's because of their slow pace. But another good matchup for Pierce. 20 carries are probably in his future this week. He finds the end zone. He's going to be a top 12 back. At 12, Jamal Williams. DeAndre Swift. Why do I have to do this every week now? Is just put Jamal Williams well ahead of DeAndre Swift. It sucks. But the Bears present a great matchup for Williams. 29th in fantasy points allowed, 28th in DVOA. So a really good matchup here for Williams to be able to be efficient and also just continue to get those. DeAndre Swift again caught a ball at the half-yard line, and instead on a first and goal, they call him to the sideline and give Jamal Williams the ball. It's just laugh out loud funny at this point. Rounding out, going to our next 6 in the RB2s on the week, David Montgomery is the RB13 for me. 27th in fantasy points allowed are the Lions. This is a matchup actually for both of these teams where they could be scoring, and 26th in DVOA. At 14, Dalvin Cook, as I get through these 12 here. Dalvin Cook against the Bills. The Bills are 10th in fantasy points allowed, 6th in DVOA. This is a tough matchup for Cook, and I've talked about this in previous videos, is the Vikings love to throw the ball in the red zone and inside the 10 in those goal-to-goal situations. So if Cook is going to have some trouble being efficient on the ground and breaking big plays, I don't really see a lot of touchdowns coming inside the red zone. So that's why I have him outside of the top 12 on the week. At 15, Deonta Foreman. I do see Chuba Hubbard may be available to play on Thursday. In that case, I might bump Foreman down a couple more spots here, but still a pretty good matchup, a game script that that is going to lend itself to the run like we talked about. And as well, at home here, the Panthers have a chance to win this game. Atlanta 21st in fantasy points allowed, 22nd in rush DVOA. So still a good matchup here. Aaron Jones in at 16 against the Cowboys. The Cowboys are a very good very good against opposing fantasy running backs, 4th in fantasy points, but they're 28th in rushing DVOA. This is the weakest part, I think, of the defense is against the run. Jones is going to be available, it looks like, this weekend. So the injury wasn't as significant as we thought it was. Have him still as an RB2 on the week in what is a bit of a tougher matchup, but still one that Jones can flourish in. RB17 is Kenneth Walker. I warned everybody about this. Now is the time to sell Kenneth Walker. And it's a week where I feel like everyone's going to be at me in the comments about this. But this is a very difficult matchup for Walker. The Bucs are still a very good run defense. They're 6th in fantasy points allowed, 13th in rush DVOA. And Kenneth Walker is not a pass catcher. He's not going to be running routes out of the backfield and catching passes. That's going to go to Travis Homer, to DJ Dallas. Even so, the Bucs are first in the NFL in receiving yards allowed to running backs. So regardless, I don't see a big week for Kenneth Walker here. Of course, Seattle will still be utilizing him. I don't think Tampa Bay's run defense is elite this season, but they've been good in the fantasy department. So I have Kenneth Walker as a middle-of-the-road RB2 on the week. I don't think that's a crazy thing to be doing. At 18, Antonio Gibson. I've talked about this before with the Eagles. The Eagles are not a good run defending team. They're tackling terribly. They're 13th in fantasy points, so it doesn't look as bad, but they're 27th in rushing DVOA. They haven't been good against the run. Gibson has been the much better back between him and Brian Robinson. So I am giving Gibson the edge here because he did outsnap him last week, and I do think Ron Rivera, has to be seeing what's going on here. Antonio Gibson is just the better back, and I expect that to continue to play out as the weeks go on. At 19, Miles Sanders against the football team, or against the Commanders, not the football team any longer. Washington's very good against the run, but they're a team that hasn't been great this season in terms of winning football games. So they get themselves into game scripts where opposing teams are looking to run the ball. I expect that to kind of be the case here for Philly as well. So they're 18th in fantasy points allowed, but they actually are 2nd in rushing DVOA. So I have Sanders in more appropriate spot, I think, from a neutral kind of matchup where he's an RB2, a middle of the road to back end RB2. Deion Jackson in at 20 against the Raiders. Jonathan Taylor, I did see as of Wednesday when we're recording here, he was practicing today. So perhaps Jonathan Taylor is in this matchup as opposed to Deion Jackson. I always lean towards worst case scenario on the injury department for these rankings this early in the week. So if Taylor's playing, I would have Taylor elevated maybe around RB 15-ish probably on the week, because the Raiders 26th in fantasy points, 17th in rushing DVOA. So it is a pretty decent matchup here in a game that the Colts can certainly win. And if Jonathan Taylor was in, I think would be better than Deion Jackson. But Jackson, to me, in a good matchup here, is still a RB2 on the week in my mind. Here's one of the ones that was a big decision for me at RB21 is Jeff Wilson. So Wilson outsnapped Mostert in his first week back. I don't expect that to mean like, week 2 of Jeff Wilson in Miami means he's going to completely take over. But I do think he does have the leg up right now. Cleveland is 28th in fantasy points allowed, 31st in rushing DVOA. This is a really good matchup, right? Really, really good for Miami. They're leading on the pass game, but in this game against Cleveland, they could very well lean on the run. It's more of who's going to score. Is Raheem Mostert going to score? Is Jeff Wilson going to score? Are they both going to score? Is neither one of them going to score? So it's hard to make that prediction because they are utilizing both right now. But I do have Wilson slightly ahead as a solid RB2 play in this matchup. At 22, Leonard Fournette going against the Seahawks. The Seahawks are 25th in fantasy points allowed, 10th in rushing DVOA. I could have Fournette higher, but we've seen what's gone on in Tampa. They can't run the ball at all. And Fournette now still has the advantage in snaps over Rachaad White by a pretty decent margin. He mentioned he was frustrated about being replaced, but it was more, if you read between the lines of what he actually meant, it was, we get that little snippet of a quote that goes onto Twitter, but it was really about being replaced. He's like leaving the field for entire drives, and they're giving Rachaad White drives on his own. So I think Fournette's still the leader in the backfield, but that kind of impacts where I can rank him because Rachaad White's still probably going to see 20-plus snaps each and every week. At 23, DeAndre Swift. I think Swift is still a good matchup. Dan Campbell had a quote just the other day about they think they can get him a little bit more involved, which is a good sign. Swift is an incredibly efficient runner, incredibly efficient player, great pass catcher, and this team is down a few, obviously with the trade of TJ Hawkinson as well. And Chicago has not been good against opposing running backs, 29th in fantasy points. Running out the top 24, Darrell Henderson going against the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals 24th in fantasy points allowed, 29th in rushing DVOA. This is a good matchup. Darrell Henderson is, in my mind, the leader of this backfield, not by a significant margin. There's still Cam Akers. There's still Malcolm Brown. There's still potentially the return of Kyron Williams. Henderson, though, was the most efficient one last week, saw the most snaps, saw the most touches, is the clear edge in terms of the receiving game as well. So I would have Henderson as narrowly an RB2 on the week. I'm not incredibly high, but I think he's the guy you want to have in LA. Our final 6 here, Khalil Herbert, the RB25. I love Herbert. Talented player, makes a lot of plays with the opportunities that he has, but it's still Montgomery's backfield. Montgomery still has a clear advantage. And if this team is trailing, Herbert is not on the field. They're giving Montgomery all of the receiving work. So I still like Herbert in this matchup as a guy you can play because this is a very positive matchup for their offense, and their offense has been looking great lately. And this is a matchup that's one of the best you can have. So I still like him. And then at 26, Raheem Mostert going against the Cleveland Browns. We talked about this matchup, how good it is, and Mostert has a slight disadvantage over Wilson, but both of them are definitely playable this week. At 27, Tyler Algier. I mentioned it with the Panthers, 30th in fantasy points allowed. A good matchup here, and a matchup that likely is going to lead to some work, plenty of work on the ground. Cordell Patterson has the advantage in terms of receiving work, but Algier can do a lot on the ground with some opportunity here. If he gets 12 to 14 carries, he can definitely make something happen against the Panthers. 28th, James Conner. The Rams are an elite run defense, first in run defense grade from PFF, 9th in fantasy points allowed. We've been through this all season when Connor's been healthy. Tough matchup. He's going to put up like 30 yards on 11 carries, maybe pick up a couple of receptions and probably not score a touchdown. And that's going to lead to maybe an RB50 week as opposed to where I have him as the RB28. But he is the lead back in this offense. You can still play him. It's tough to sit him, especially if you're dealing with any buys. At 29, Devin Singletary going against the Vikings, who are 5th in fantasy points allowed, 2nd in run defense grade. Another really tough matchup. But Josh Allen's health is in question. This point spread has dropped 5 points, I believe. Yeah, 5 points since it opened. I think the books are expecting Josh Allen not to play in this game, and if he's not available, Devin Singletary's work, especially as a receiver, could really elevate with Case Keenum at QB. Keenum can still move this offense, I think, well enough, but they might be more leaning on the ground game, and we don't have Josh Allen stealing any touchdowns inside the 5 because we've got Case Keenum, who's not afraid to run the ball and put his body in the line either, but they won't be looking to do it in designed ways in this game. Last is Rachaad White at 30 against Seattle. Again, I mentioned it. He's getting opportunities. He's working as a receiver, especially. He's still someone that I think in this matchup you could potentially consider playing as the guy running up my top 30. Some players missing. Najee Harris, nowhere to be found, my RB31. And then the Kansas City running backs. I know Jacksonville can be a positive matchup, but this split is just, it's not worth touching. Like Clyde Edwards-Helaire was outsnapped by both Pacheco and McKinnon. And Pacheco seems to be the guy starting every game, so I'd give him a slight advantage over Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But all these guys are going to get work. It's a guessing game of who to play. And then A.J. Dillon I have outside the top 30. It's just not happening for A.J. Dillon these days. And Kareem Hunt also outside my top 30. All right, that is the top 30 for Week 10 in fantasy football. If you guys have any start-sit questions for me at the position, happy to answer as many as I can. Drop them down below in the comments. And of course, check out our partners over at Betfred. You can bet $50 at Betfred when you sign up, and they're going to give you $250 in free bets. Thursday Night Football, I love Tyler Algier over 31.5 rushing yards. You can go get bet on that at Betfred as well. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.